Mitchell, the district attorney in Suffolk County, which is Boston, Chelsea Winthrop in Revere. We've had a really great group of panels over Black History Month, and this is the fourth and final panel we have, and I cannot tell you how honored I am to engage in a conversation with two women I admire very, very deeply. And there are not many people that I look up to, truly, who are both younger than me biologically, but quite older than I am in DA years and experience. We are going to possibly be joined by one other district attorney, but I wanted to start because we have a lot to go over at this point. So I'm going to start with the first and introduce my dear friend, Marilyn Mosby, who is the state's attorney for Baltimore. She won a primary in June of 2024 and became the state's attorney in January of 2015. I certainly remember seeing her beautiful face and her stiff and steel spine standing in front of the country and leading in the Freddie Gray case, as many of you might. She has been somebody who was one of the first with respect to when people talk about progressive prosecutors. This woman has shattered glass ceilings, and it is her head, as State's Attorney Fox likes to say, that was one of the first that went through leading this nation where many of us now follow. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself in a moment, but I am now going to turn to State's Attorney Kim Fox, who won her primary in March of 2016, becoming the state's attorney in December of 2016. She entered the race on the heels of the Laquan McDonald case. Many of us know about that case as well, unfortunately. And these names, people, are the names that predated our George Floyd's, our Ahmaud Arbery's, our Breonna Taylor's. These two brilliant lawyers and prosecutors were the ones leading the way well before anyone was talking about these cases the way that we are right now. DA Fox or State's Attorney Fox, and we are all called different things, but we are all elected prosecutors, has the second largest state's attorney's office in the United States of America. She is responsible for close to 1,300 employees that she is running herself in Cook County, Chicago. She is leading the way with respect to being transparent and allowing data to be shared with other people. But rather than me pontificate about these two wonderful women, I want to give them an opportunity to say, State's Attorney Mosby, if you had an opportunity to introduce yourself and you only had 30 to 45 seconds to say what was the most important thing about you as a person and as a state's attorney, how would you introduce yourself?
So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for the invitation. I'm so incredibly honored to even be invited to speak on a panel with my esteemed colleagues. Wesley will get on shortly. Kim Fox, who I love and adore. She's doing some phenomenal work in Chicago. But I am so incredibly proud of the woman right there representing my hometown so well. I'm born and raised in Dorchester. And I just got to say that Rachel Rollins is rocking it out. You talk about courage and resilience and brilliance and just having that Black girl magic. I'm just so incredibly proud of this woman and so proud to be here and representing for Beantown. But yes, how would I introduce myself? I guess I would say I am a wife and I'm a mommy, right? I have two little girls, and that's my primary, the light of my life. They're 10 and they're 12 years old. But I'm also a Black woman. And I think that when you think about the fact that, as Black women, we are the foundation of our communities, I think that is what I see when I see the racial injustices and inequality that has affected and attempting to reverse mass incarceration. I feel like somewhat of a responsibility. I remember I went to Dover Sherborne. I was in the METCO program in Massachusetts, bussed an hour out of the inner city of Boston to one of the richest towns in Massachusetts. And I remember my yearbook quote, and I think that it's still relevant today. It's by Nikki Giovanni. It's one part where she says, "I would not reject my strength, though it's not by choice, but responsibility." And as a Black woman in this time and in this moment, we have a responsibility to right the wrongs of the past and to eradicate and ensure that we are rectifying mass incarceration and disproportionate impact that the criminal justice system has had on communities of color.
I love it. State's Attorney, will you tell us, Fox, how you would introduce yourself as a person and then as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for Cook County?
Yeah, so let me echo what my good sis Marilyn said. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with you all, who I greatly admire. I too remember Marilyn standing outside and advocating on behalf of Freddie Gray. And it was a few months before, it was while I was deciding whether or not I was going to run. I'd done some polling and it wasn't looking good. And I had to decide whether or not I would put my family through the grueling aspects of a campaign. And seeing Marilyn out there and what she represented and what it meant to people in Chicago to see Marilyn really pushed me. And so it's always an honor to be with the person who made room and space for me. And then to see you in the room and space that we could make for you just makes us feel proud. It almost makes us feel like we're old, because like, this has only been like 4 or 5 years.
Believe me, I know.
But yeah, in state's attorney years, it's like 17 years. What would I say about me?
Dog years, right? I know.
It's worse than dog years. It's like a 17 years per year. What would I say about me? As was mentioned earlier, I'm a Chicago girl through and through. I'm a Chicago public housing child of a teenage mom girl. And I start with that in every conversation that I have, because when we look at the people who use our criminal justice system, victims, those who have been accused, communities, they look like the communities that I grew up in. And very often people say to me, "Oh my God, you're so inspiring. You know, how is it that you were able to achieve the things that you've achieved?" And that's based on the supposition that I was supposed to fail. It's based on an acceptance that people from neighborhoods like mine, with experiences like mine, should in fact be in jails and prisons or victims of crime. And there's an inevitability with people with my background that we'd end up in the justice system, just not as the top prosecutor. And so that's what frames my policy agenda, is that I'm not special. I'm not unique, that we lose so much talent and treasure in our communities that have been thrown away by violence and terrible policies in response to that. And I want to be able to have an agenda that keeps our community safe, that recognizes that in any of these neighborhoods, the first Black, whomever exists. And if we don't create the conditions for them to grow and thrive, then we all suffer. And so that's how I've tried to run my office, wedded to where I come from, because it keeps me rooted in policies that I think uplifts us all.
I love it, right? So Marilyn, let me go to you. I mean, most of us remember that day, right? Seeing you walk out with microphones and speak, and I'm getting goosebumps as I think of it now. Walk me through, you were how many years into your role, and just the enormous sort of, well, I don't want to put it on you now, but just what were you feeling in that moment? What was your thought process when it came to moving forward in that case? And walk me through why this is a victory, because I certainly understand that Freddie Gray and your decision to stand there and hold people accountable resulted in profound changes that were the first domino of many that fell through regarding holding police departments accountable, right? So let me just ask you, and you have several minutes to walk us through leading up to that where were you in your tenure, and what were you feeling inside of yourself? And then, Kim, I'm going to go to you with Laquan, just as far as what Chicago was feeling, what you dealt with when you were handling that case, or your office was. Go ahead, Marilyn.
So the one thing I can say is it wasn't years within my term, right? I won my election at 34 years of age. I became one of the youngest chief prosecutors of any major American city when I beat an incumbent that outraised me by double-digit percentage points. Everybody said I was too young, I was too inexperienced, couldn't raise enough money. Me running for this position would not only interrupt but potentially destroy my husband's political career. I beat an incumbent. And I come from a law enforcement background. My grandfather was the first and one of the founding members of the first Black police organization in Massachusetts, MAMLEO. My uncles, my mom, my dad, everybody, we grew up in what was called the police house. So law enforcement was very much ingrained within me, but so was equal justice, right? And one standard of justice, regardless of your race, sex, religion, and occupation. I was actually 4 months into my first term as state's attorney when an innocent 25-year-old Black man made eye contact with police. He was unconstitutional. He was chased down in his high crime neighborhood. He was unconstitutionally arrested. He was placed into a metal wagon head first, feet shackled and handcuffed. And his pleas for medical attention were ignored after his spine was partially severed in the back of that wagon. I followed the facts with the law. I wouldn't do anything differently. And what I can say is that, in that moment, right, maybe I was somewhat naive to recognize or to understand what the backlash was going to be, and attempting to hold officers to the same account as everyone else. But it just made sense to me. This is what we went to law school for. This was the application of justice. The mission of a prosecutor, one of the most important stakeholders in the criminal justice system, is to be able to provide that one standard of justice for all. And so it was crazy because, when I got the hate mail and the death threats, and they described how my husband was going to be killed coming out of my house and how no police officers were going to respond, and they subpoenaed my family's personnel records and put it on the front page of the Baltimore Sun. And I was on Fox every single day. Our former president referred to me as shameful and disgraceful. I think it's a badge of honor. But that type of resistance and that type of, I would say, it was overwhelming, right? And so what I had to learn very early on is how not to internalize it, because this was pre-Trump, this was the tweets when people were saying anything racist, and now we can laugh that off. But when it was first coming, this was all very new to me, and I can look back now and understand and recognize that although those individual officers weren't held individually and criminally responsible, every single police officer in the city of Baltimore is being held accountable for the actions of a few. That accountability, which you already mentioned, which wasn't being had, led to exposure. A week after I charged those officers, the Department of Justice came in and exposed the discriminatory policing practices of the 8th largest police department in the country. That exposure ultimately led to reform. We now have a federally enforceable consent decree that, even despite the Trump administration that tried to stop it, is still on record. And we can point to tangible reforms that were actually put into place as a direct result of the decision that I made in prosecuting those police officers. So, the use of force policies and de-escalation policies that emphasize the sanctity of life, the affirmative responsibility for colleagues and to intervene when their fellow officers cross the line, right? We can point to the mandate for prisoners to be seatbelted and for the police to call a medic when asked and requested. We had police officers who got up on the stand and said they didn't know about the general orders and procedures and protocols. There's now software verification that ensures adherence to those protocols. So those are tangible reforms. But when I dropped those charges, one of the things that I said was that I can try this case 100 times. Without that systemic reform, this would be the same result. So police investigating themselves, right? We have to ensure that police don't police themselves. No profession should be in the business of doing that, right? Where they're not asking the most pertinent questions of their colleagues and their classmates and their friends. The Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, which ties the hands of the police department from getting rid of problematic officers, right? Like we should, you look at what happened with George Floyd. This individual, that police officer, had over 18 internal affairs complaints, right? Why is that individual still on the job, right? And so there were systems, and the good thing about what took place out of that decision is not just the tangible reforms, but we're now talking about the systemic reforms, not just statewide, where I've been advocating for these for the past 6 years, but nationally. And so that is, my perspective. Justice is always worth the price paid for its pursuit.
For sure. And officers that have claimed that they were wrongfully prosecuted by you, that was denied in your favor by the United States Supreme Court, right? Because you have prosecutorial immunity, or, which an ironic turn, right? All right. So Kim, let's turn to you now. Walk us through, not only as you are considering running for office and things are happening regarding the on the heels of the Laquan McDonald case. For those of us that don't know, if you could walk us through that quickly, and then talk to me as well, if you would please, Kim, about the sort of all the work you've done regarding conviction integrity. So I think two of the sort of the kind of right hand, left hand punch that I hope progressive prosecutors are doing are, we are holding, to Marilyn's point, people accountable. Or we are not pulling people down to the floor. We're raising the floor up to those that are wealthy and privileged. We just want everyone to have the same experience in the criminal legal system as, Epstein and others with money do, where, you get the benefit of the doubt in your favor at all times. What I will ask you, though, is when it comes to not only holding police accountable, but also making sure you look back to see whether you or your predecessors got it right. If you could talk to me about the Laquan McDonald case, but also all you've done with conviction integrity, in particular, those 15 men whose convictions were all stemmed from the misconduct, I believe, of a single Chicago police officer.
Yeah. So Laquan McDonald was a 17-year-old boy who was shot and killed by police officer Jason Van Dyke. Laquan was in the middle of a psychiatric episode, was walking down the street holding a small pocket knife. Police had been working to de-escalate the situation, following him for blocks. Jason Van Dyke pulls up and within 3 seconds exits his car and shoots him 16 times, the last 10 of the shots while he lay on the ground. And, the immediate aftermath was a story that was told by the police union that was amplified in the media, that Laquan had in fact approached the police officer with the knife in a threatening manner, and that's why he had to shoot. And it wasn't until videotape evidence came out that disproved that. And that happened back in 2014. And my predecessor had not made a decision on that case until it got a lot of media attention. A $5 million lawsuit had been paid. Activists and advocates had taken to the streets, and a judge was going to order the release of that video, because the video, the city and my predecessor fought to keep suppressed. And on the day that the video was released, she brought charges 14 months after Laquan was shot dead in the streets. And so that was the case. And when she brought charges, I was already in the middle of the campaign. I didn't know what was happening with Laquan when I decided to run for office, because it had been so suppressed. But it was looming heavy because the advocates and activists who had taken to the street really concerned themselves for the first time, I think, in my history in this county, with what is the role of the prosecutor. Most people didn't actually know what the prosecutor does. They confused the state's attorney with the attorney general, with the U.S. attorney. It got attorney. So people was like, they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what the role was. And the sad reality was there wasn't an expectation that police officers would be tried and treated like anyone else. But there was a demand that they do. And so a special prosecutor was appointed because I beat Anita Alvarez in the primary while that case was pending. And she then went to the courts and asked for a special prosecutor. So I didn't personally try that case. My office didn't. But he was subsequently found guilty of second-degree murder and is serving 6.5 years, which certainly is not nearly long enough. He was found guilty of 16 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm, which that in and of itself is eligible for 6 to 30 years. And yet he got 6 years for taking the life. But what it did for me when I first got in, within the first 2 months, I had 2 police officers that were charged with homicide. One for an off-duty shooting that, again, when police officers arrived, were giving their buddy the benefit of the doubt. And in fact, he murdered someone. And we were able to get a conviction of second-degree murder in that case. A month later, and again, this is 2 months into my tenure, we charged an Amtrak officer who, doing a pat down in Union Station for someone they believe they smell marijuana, the guy breaks free, runs away, and the officer has enough time to adjust his gloves and shoot him in the back, and kills him. And that case went before a judge, and a judge found him not guilty. And so it was critical to me. And again, Maryland's example, just a year earlier, that we have to actively and aggressively pursue these cases when they arise. And when we don't have the evidence, when we cannot bring charges, we have to be just as transparent about that as well. Because I can talk about the 2 cases we charged, but there have been several cases where we've not been able to bring charges because the evidence hasn't been sufficient. And that's our mandate. It's our mandate. And it should, I think the reflex of generations before was these cases are complicated. We're not going to get a conviction. We have to work with them. So it wasn't worth the effort. It is always worth the effort. The diminishment of the credibility of our system in a city like Chicago, where we have the violent crime that we see, a lot of it is driven by street justice. A lot of it is driven by a lack of faith and in credibility in our criminal justice system, because they see law enforcement getting away with the very things that they are holding others accountable for. So if you don't respect me and I don't respect you, we'll take care of this in the streets. And so it's not even just about police accountability. It's a public safety thing. It's a public safety issue. If I don't want you taking care of it in the streets and in the court, then I have to make you believe that our courts are fair and just and we treat people the same. And that being said, my office has also said, we know that there were corrupt police officers who worked in law enforcement. And it's not like a hunch. We had a sergeant who went to prison for shaking people down in one of our public housing units for years. He went to prison for the shakedowns. And so, it was critical to me that we do something about that. And that meant for us vacating wrongful convictions associated with that, to the tune of, we did the first ever mass exoneration in Cook County, where it was 15 men who had their convictions vacated. That was in 2017. We're now up to 109 convictions that are now vacated as a result of this police officer or this sergeant, and that we have to continually work on every year. We're not done in looking at those convictions. And so it is holding police officers accountable when they do harm and going back and repairing the harm that was caused in the past.
Hi, State's Attorney Fox and State's Attorney Mosby. We lost DA Rollins. She's going to come right back. But we actually do have another question for you. Could you talk a little bit about, okay, she's back here now. All right.
I promise I said, right. I'm like, damn, can I not be embarrassed with like my lights going out and everything else? But I promise we're doing okay here in Boston. All right, Kim, I last heard you say the 15 mass exoneration. Do you mind just starting right? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'd said that we did the first ever mass exoneration in Cook County in 2017, where it was 15 men. Just last Friday, we did another 9 that has brought over the last 4 years, 109 convictions that have been vacated just associated with Sergeant Watts. 109. And we have additional convictions that have been overturned that haven't been related to him. But it's important that people see that. And the people that he was shaking down and framing, these were poor, Black men and women. Many of them had convictions in their background. And people said to me, well, what do you care? I care because I don't care who you are. You don't get to do that. You don't get to do that. And they were vulnerable to this because of their background. They were vulnerable to this because who were you going to believe? Someone who had a drug conviction or a police officer. And what we have said is that everyone has the same level of credibility until you prove us otherwise. That we don't elevate the credibility of police officers over those who are not in law enforcement. And we treat them the same. And then treating them the same means giving them their lives back by vacating these convictions.
I love it. And what is so beautiful about both of you, and I think people with lived experiences, is it's just, I like to say to my staff, the old system barely took one step, right? Who we are is we take not just this one step, but what are all the things that need to happen when we can recognize the collateral consequences of these bad, unjust, unconstitutional, unethical, and criminal, quite frankly, behaviors. But, Massachusetts, Kim, is unfortunately known as being, the state with not one but two of the largest drug lab scandals in the history of the United States, where we've had individuals that no audit function whatsoever looking over them, falsifying, drug certifications or using the drugs themselves. And our system is such that all of my predecessors were trying to hold up these convictions that were cancer, right? That had rotted through the entire process. And that is where I think the two of you have led, in the sense that with my name on the wall now, we are not going to be standing behind unjustly, obtained, illegally or unethically obtained things. And believe me, I am competitive. We have, these are drug crimes. So I know people say, I'm not saying they are victimless per se, but this is not a murder. This is not a rape. This is not a kidnapping where we have a discernible human victim that we can point at, that we have to have that conversation with. But I said very early on when this first occurred, we need to vacate every single one of the cases that these two chemists touch, because one of two things is going to happen. Either defendant Rollins is going to say, oh my God, I have just been given the gift of a lifetime and I'm going to turn my life around and become a woman of the cloth, or I'm going to go back to being who I was before, and you will be found and held responsible, right? But let's not try to back up these negative, and unjust, and I find the most irony in it is people always claim that we as progressives don't want to hold people accountable. Yes, we do, right? And here's where we're going to be doing it. So Marilyn, walk me through some of the, walk me through some of the different policies that you've put into place. I know, so for example, in Massachusetts, we have voted that marijuana, not only because we are hippies, right? Not only is it medicinal, but also recreational. Are certain amounts, of course, have been legalized, right? You have been leading with respect to marijuana. For the non-lawyers that are watching now, can you walk me through, not just with Baltimore, but what the tension is between some states and the federal government with marijuana, and why you find it really important that you are vocal about your position on this issue?
So what I can tell you is that in 2019, one of the things that we did, we worked with the American Civil Liberties Union, and we used data, right? And one of the things, unfortunately, Baltimore is known for violence, and the number of homicides that we have on average, or which have been in the past 6 years, about 300 or more. And when we look at that, you kind of talked about it. And when you came into office, you understood that redefining what public safety means is something that's incredibly important. For far too long, we have relied on the police department to respond to every social ill of society, whether that's homelessness, mental health issues, these smaller sort of issues or nuisance crimes that for Black people in this country can lead to somebody's death. You look at Sandra Bland, she failed to put on a turn signal. You look at, this latest George Floyd, who was allegedly passing a $20 bill during a global pandemic to buy groceries, right? He ends up dead. You look at, selling a loose cigarette. For Black people in this country, those nuisance crimes can lead to somebody's death. Prosecutors are one of the most important stakeholders because we decide who's going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with, what sentence recommendations they're going to make. And guess what else? We have discretion to decide what we're not going to prosecute. And so, looking at the data in 2019, one of the things that I realized is that, it's counterproductive. It's counterproductive when you're in a city like Baltimore with over 300 homicides. It's counterproductive to focus on marijuana when we know that the consumption among white and Black people is the same. Yet if you're an African-American male in this country, you're 4 times more likely to be arrested for mere possession. Well, in the city of Baltimore, you were 6 times more likely to be arrested for mere possession. And even after they decriminalized 10 grams or less, where the police were then responsible for issuing citations, 42% of the citations that they were issuing were issued in 1 out of 9 police districts, which happen to be 95% Black and disproportionately impoverished, right? So not only is this law counterproductive to the limited resources that we have in law enforcement, we should be focusing on unsolved. We're only solving 1 out of 4 homicides at that point a year, right? Not only there's no public safety value in prosecuting these types of offenses. What we've seen in those places where they've actually legalized marijuana is that there's no drastic increase in crime. So no public safety value, counterproductive to limited resources that we have, and it's being discriminately enforced against poor Black and brown people. Well, the power and discretion that we have as prosecutors is we don't have to be complicit in that. And that's what I came out and said. I'm not going to be complicit in discriminatory enforcement of laws against poor Black and brown people. I've worked with 5 police commissioners, 4 mayors in the past 5 years. And that commissioner was adamant that he came from DEA. He was going to still prosecute. But my power was I can release individuals without charges. So if you arrest them, I'm going to release them without charges. We also moved to vacate. We didn't have a vacatur statute on the books like you guys do. So we had the power and the ability. My legislative team went down to Annapolis to advocate for this, but we moved to creatively think of a way that we could vacate over 5,000 prior marijuana convictions. Of course, the judge denied it, but we were able to eventually get the law changed. And as a direct result of some of the issues that you all have been facing, right? Like I had one of the largest police corruption scandals in the history of the country, where we had a squad of police officers who were planting guns and drugs on citizens and redistributing the drugs onto the streets of Baltimore for decades, right? That in and of itself, we've had to vacate it. Thanks to my policy and legislative team that we're able to change the laws, despite my colleagues who came and testified in opposition to that law. We were able to vacate over 800 convictions as a result of those corrupt police officers. And I can tell you thousands of cases that had to be dismissed as a result of those police officers. So I had the awesome opportunity of going to Congress and testifying on the MORE Act and really advocating and saying that this is being disproportionately implied to poor Black and brown people. And a lot of it has to do with the federal system that was incentivizing these local states with money in militarizing police to target Black people. And so they have a responsibility to rectify that wrong. And through the MORE Act, we were very grateful. It's not yet passed, but it did pass through Congress, and where we have to get it through the Senate, and I'm optimistic that it will happen. But that's the importance of what we do as prosecutors. You can not only advocate for those individuals that you believe have committed a crime, you should be exonerating individuals that have been wrongly convicted and incarcerated, and you should be advocating for laws on both the state and the federal level to ensure that our voices are heard and that we are able to rectify the wrongs of the past.
Excellent. Kim, how do you respond to people who say, all you do is talk about race? Why does everything have to be, about race? And, it's not all about Black people that aren't, that are being targeted all the time. Marilyn, we're going to get to you after Marilyn and I and others were supportive of Kim Gardner, who's a peer of ours in St. Louis. Several of us flew down to support her. She was being sort of vilified in her community by law enforcement and others. And Marilyn came home to a voicemail message that, essentially said, like, I think, the thesis sentence was like, if we had known you Black women were going to be this problematic, we would have picked our own damn cotton. It was much longer than that, but
Effing
just
cotton.
a woman. I'm apologetic. This is a children's show. She also sounded like she had smoked 40 packs of pools just that morning, but that's irrelevant. So Kim, what say you to people who, hypothetically, I don't know if Chicago and Baltimore are like Boston, but people are like, saying I'm Louis Farrakhan and all I do is talk about race all the time. Walk me through why race is a topic that we discuss so frequently as progressive prosecutors, and in the role you have as the chief law enforcement officer of the second largest DA's office in the United States of America.
Yeah, I mean, first I start with when I walk into a room, it is what you see. I am a Black woman in this role, and many of the rooms that I walk into, I am an only. I think part of the excitement about the friendships that we've been able to hone in this sisterhood of Black women prosecutors is because we recognize that we are a rarity. That if you look at the data shows that I think it's somewhere of slightly over 1% of elected prosecutors are Black women. And, we all have them in our phones. It's like that few of us. This is an overwhelmingly white male dominated field. It is almost 80% of elected prosecutors are white men. Another 15% are white women. And so the small percentage of people of color, of Black people who do this work is really minute. And yet I work in Cook County where 86% of the people in my jail are Black and brown. I work in a county that, 75%, 80% of my homicide victims are Black men. That the communities that are most impacted by violence are Black communities. And so the reality is, for people who say I don't see race, I absolutely see race. And people who see me see my race. And a lot of the assumptions about our work, our ability, the attacks that we get are based on race. And this pussyfooting around race and the reluctance to talk about the systems and institutions that were built on structural and institutional racism is how we have the system that we have today. It is how we get to the overrepresentation of Black people for marijuana convictions, because we're pretending like enforcement strategies aren't different in Black communities versus white communities. So when Marilyn tells you about the likelihood that Black people are going to be arrested for the exact same acts that whites and Asians and Latinos have, and we want to pretend like there is not something else involved here, is why we're just going to keep incrementally changing things versus having the hard conversations about, I've inherited a system that has been rooted in systemic racism that has impacted Black communities, particularly poor Black communities, and I'm in this seat for 4 years. And so whoever comes next, whatever policy changes that I've made, until we address white supremacy and these issues, we're gonna keep revisiting this. If we saw what happened with Marilyn and Freddie Gray in 2015, me with Laquan in 2016, and we talk about Tamir Rice, we talk about Eric Garner, we get to George Floyd, we go through this list. It's exhausting, it's exhaustive, because we haven't done the work to talk about why this happens. That isn't just the issue of policing and use of force. It is, why is it disproportionately happening in our communities? What is it about a 12-year-old playing in a gazebo with a toy gun like 12-year-olds do, that somehow when you see him as a grown man with criminality versus a little boy? That's rooted in race. And so what I say to people, and it's funny, it's generally not Black people, or people of color who say to me, you talk about race too much. It's generally not in circles where people who've been impacted say it. It has been by those who have occupied the seat and the privilege to not see it. If you get to tell me that you don't see race, that is a privilege that I have no recognition of, because I can't help but feel it when I'm shopping and I see how people are looking at me, or I have relatives who are engaged. I have a brother that lives in these neighborhoods. Me being the state's attorney does not in any way diminish my Blackness and how the world treats my Blackness or my Black womanhood. And so I do no one a service by pretending like that's not real. And I think one of the things that I've appreciated about Marilyn, about you, about Kim Gardner, and others is the unwillingness to be respectable and graceful at all times in talking about it. Because back in the day, when you're new to this, it's like, well, you don't want to talk about that. And it's like, no, I want you to see this racist email I got. I want you to hear this voicemail. We're all mothers. We all have daughters. I want you to see what people are saying. I had a police chief in one of my suburban districts who called me the C word in an email because he didn't like my policies. It's a child-friendly show. What is this? I sent that reply all to everybody. I want you all to see what's happening, because we do a disservice to the next state's attorney who sits in these seats by not calling the thing a thing. Because if it wasn't about race, then they're not going to mention picking cotton. If it wasn't about race, they're not going to mention, it's not going to be, if it wasn't about, if the storming of the Capitol and the running the halls with a Confederate flag, if you think that's economic anxiety and not race, that's how we get here. And so I don't have time for that.
And the hanging of a noose, the erecting of a noose on the Capitol lawn. Right. Yeah.
We're pretending.
Unreal.
And that pretending only hurts us. That not calling it out, not speaking about it, only does a disservice to us for the comfort of those who have the privilege to be comforted by ignorance.
I love it. All right. Well, we have been joined by some more Black excellence in the fabulous Wesley Bell. I want to just very, very quickly introduce him and then allow him to speak for a moment, because we only have about 18 minutes left. So Wesley Bell is the prosecuting attorney in St. Louis. We've talked, Wesley, about the fact that we all have different alleged titles, but we're all elected prosecutors. So I'm the DA, you're the prosecuting attorney, Kim and Marilyn are state's attorneys. You won your primary in August of 2018 and became or were inaugurated in January of 2019. Most people know St. Louis for obviously Nellie and the St. Lunatic. I'm joking. All right. Most people know St. Louis with respect to, unfortunately, the Michael Brown case. And if you wouldn't mind walking us through your decision to run and where it was with respect to the Michael Brown case, who the incumbent was that you beat, and a little bit about why you believe you won your election.
So first and foremost, good to see you all. I'm gathering by the comments that this started at 4:50 my time, or I'm assuming, because I thought I was early. So sorry about that. I had and I'll say this quick because I know you're running out of time now. There was a lot of things that inspired me. It was a culmination of events I served. One would be these two ladies joining me on the phone. They served as inspirations for me, but also serving as a Ferguson city councilman. I had an opportunity to work on the Ferguson consent decree, working with President Obama's Department of Justice. I have to clarify that on that Ferguson consent decree, bringing community policing, some of the most broad court reforms. And once we were able to start getting that ship turning in a positive direction, it just gave me the confidence to say, hey, we should take this show on the road, because these same type of reforms, we need them countywide and regionally, and even around the country, as you three have shown as well.
Okay, and walk me through, we see, I think it's now Congresswoman Cori Bush that came out of, your region, where she was an activist, right, with respect to after Michael Brown. Tell me who the DA was when in your role as, your previous role, which was elected prior to running for DA. What was your relationship with the district attorney? What were some of his policies? Would you argue that he was progressive or not? And why did you choose to focus there?
I'm really trying to hold my laugh in and be diplomatic
I know,
with
I
that
know.
question. But no, I know exactly where you're going, and it's a good question. The district attorney that preceded me was definitely not progressive minded, and was probably the opposite of as far as the values and things that that we all agree with or champion. Was the opposite, and I think that led to a lot of and I think around the country you can see the types of progressive-minded prosecutors that arose out of cities similar to ours, where you had the quote-unquote law and order prosecutors, which law and order doesn't really mean anything; it's more rhetoric, and the need to recognize that too many people, nonviolent, low-level offenders, are seeing the inside of a jail, which increases the likelihood that they're going to see it again, as opposed to giving them the treatment that they need and the things that will keep them out of jail. I think that it was important for us to bring those same types of policies here that we saw in Baltimore, that we saw in Chicago, and I had the pleasure of visiting both of those offices more recently, and Boston's on my to-do list too. But I just think that there's just I think we see this around the country, and when people hear the why behind the policies that we implement, they get on board, and they tend to get on board regardless of what side of the aisle they're on, and I just think that I'm about the data and the research and going where the data and research leads us, and when we give people the support and services that they need, they offend less, they're able to support their families and do all the things, be good citizens, if you will. So why wouldn't we continue doing those types of things?
Marilyn, I have a question. So I was reading an article, and this is a title that I just thought, how is Marilyn getting, like, Shannon McCutcheon and Jessica Pierre-Louis, who I don't know whether that's your you are ghostwriting for them, but media unfairly targeted and tried Baltimore prosecutor Marilyn Mosby. It's a commentary, right? Can we talk a little bit about, look, anyone who runs for office, I have a newfound respect for, right? I believed, city councilors woke up at noon and drank a cup of coffee, watched some Law and Order, and then went to sleep at 6 p.m. Some of them do. I know all of you are working incredibly hard in your roles, but I guess for me, I know I've seen some of the things that Wesley has had to deal with, some of the things that Kim has had to deal with, Marilyn, things that you've had to deal with. How is it different, would you say, for you as a prosecutor, as a woman, as a Black woman, than maybe others? What are the things that you might be dealing with? And Kim's already touched on this a little bit. And then how did you get, because just asking for a friend to see if the Globe or anyone else can do that, how did you get them to admit, I'm sorry, so you're coming after me like this when I've been in my role for less than 2 years, but we have other people just crip walking and doing nothing at all, but getting glorious stories written about them all the time? Walk me through those two different things. Like how is it different for you, and how do you get them to admit when they're wrong?
I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. I just had to learn very early on how not to internalize this, right? Like I've gotten, it's called misogynoir, right? When you're a Black woman in this role, and the media bias is something that I don't know. It's just innate. They do it. And I think it's very intentional, to be quite honest with you. I don't know how I deal with it, right? Like there's no sort of prescriptive way that I can say that you're going to ever be at ease with the media who will vilify you for attempting to be transparent or attempting to correlate prior corruption of the past with you when that's not synonymous, right? I can remember it being like my first couple of weeks in the office, and I came into office and I was a law clerk in that office. I knew that office. I knew the culture of that office. And I came and I terminated 6 employees that I knew were inefficient and ineffective. And they wrote about it in the Sun for 3 weeks and referred to it as a massacre, right? And when you look at my colleagues, I love Larry Krasner, great guy, I love him. But when he came into office, he got rid of 30 people. How did they write about it? They wrote about that as reform and the need for reform. And that was something that had to take place. I can remember when there was this allegation of like a homicide review commission in my first couple of months in office, where I said, I'm not allowing a researcher at Johns Hopkins to come in and to be able to interview witnesses in open and pending cases, right? And the commissioner agreed with me. But for weeks, what they wrote about on the local paper was Play Nice. This was the title of the editorial, Play Nice, Miss Mosby. First of all, it's Mrs. Mrs. Mosby. And they chastised me as if I was a child, right? So that's a type of misogyny. I can remember one of my colleagues in Annapolis, when we talked about police accountability reform, and I was saying, hey, we need to conform Maryland standards to federal standards. And when it comes to, the election of bench trials, the state should be a part of that process, the same way it is in the federal level. That colleague of mine went on the radio and called me a moron, right? Nobody came to my defense. These are the types of scenarios that happen on a day-to-day basis that I've had to deal with for the past 6 years, but what I've learned and realized is that this is so much greater than me. And I know you guys get tired of me saying this. For those of you on our Black Girl Magic network of support, I can tell you that it's greater than me. And so understanding and recognizing that since I've been in place and had to go through all that I've gone through, to see Rachel Rollins come in and out the gate say, I'm not prosecuting this, and here's why, right? And it doesn't matter. You want to take this to court? Let's go. Like that in and of itself is fulfilling for me, and recognizing that this was never about me personally. It was always about a greater sort of movement where now, as progressive prosecutors, we apply one standard of justice. We hold police officers accountable. We exonerate the innocent, right? We do our job. We advocate for state and federal and local laws that are going to make a difference, that are going to reverse the effects of mass incarceration on our communities. And so for me, that's what it's always been about. It was always greater than me. And seeing you, Wesley Bell, representing, and Kim Fox, I am so incredibly proud of you all. And so that's what keeps me going. And I'm going to do this as long as I can, because we have so much more work to do.
Wesley, you were a public defender, right? And had never worked in the office you now run. Is that accurate? Yeah. So walk me through, just because it is not only the importance of how, and you are obviously a gifted lawyer, but how were you able to shift the culture? And I know we only have a couple minutes left, and this is a big question, but in addition, I'm so sort of inspired with respect to your story, because when Marilyn says, look, I had been an intern in this office, or Kim says, I worked in this office, I know this office. And even though I hadn't worked in my office, I had been a federal assistant United States attorney for a while. You came in, now you know how to do this dance, you do it backwards, or in high heels, the joke is, right? If you're right on the other side defending and you hear everything we do, how do you change the culture when there might be the haters inside that say, you've never even presented to a grant, you don't know what the prosecutor, blah, blah, blah. What was that like for you? Oh, we're not hearing you.
How about now?
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
Better. I was fortunate because, and I say this all the time, is that people like Kim Fox, people like Marilyn and Larry, we're constantly building on what those before us have done. And so those two in particular, these two ladies were two of the people that made it easier for me, because they had kind of laid that map out a little bit. And so that, I think, for you and I, made it a little bit easier. And then those coming behind us can use that example. And so, and a matter of fact, I don't know if you remember this conversation in your office. One of the things you talked about was it takes about a year to start seeing that change in culture as you start bringing in your people that are on mission. And also, there's some people that are going to be in the middle that you can bring on to the other side. And like Marilyn said, there's some people that just got to go. And so we were the same way. We got rid of 3 people on day 1, and you would act like it was just Armageddon, like we just fired the entire office. And and I would say, what transition doesn't have any turnover? And when reporters would come to me and they would say, well, why would you get rid of? Because whenever you get rid of someone, it's a veteran prosecutor. And I would just say, the only way that I know how to bring about change is actually change. And so by getting good people around me to make sure that we were able to learn from not only the good things from others, but I asked both of these ladies, tell me some of the things you wish you could have done better, so that I could learn from those things and learn from those examples. And people like Marilyn and Kim and Larry and George and LA now were just always so open to sharing their experiences, good and bad, and it just made it a lot easier for me. And so when you and I came along, right about the same time, it just made it that much easier. And it's still hard, still a tough job. You still got the naysayers, but when you know that you got some people that have your back that you can lean on, it helps. It helps. But yeah, it is tougher when you haven't been in the office. And I'll end on this by saying, per your earlier conversation, I made a decision a long time ago that the only way that I could work in this office is if I ran it, because the individual who preceded me, I wouldn't have lasted, because they weren't about giving second chances to people who deserved it. It was just about how many years can we give them, and I wouldn't have lasted long in an atmosphere like that.
All right. Well, this is the lightning round. All right. So we're going to start with Miss Kim, and I get 3 things, that I'm going to ask you. None of them are related, and you don't know what any of them are yet. So one of them is sort of work related, and then 2 others. So what policy or initiative are you working on right now that you are most proud of?
We just passed historic legislation 2 days ago. Illinois is the first state to legally eliminate cash bail. And we've been pushing for that for the last 4 years. And so I think I'm most proud of that, because I think when I look at my haters who are like, she doesn't care about this, we were the only one of 2 prosecutors out of 102 that fought and pushed for this bill to become law, and cash bail will be eliminated in 2023.
All right. I love it. Number 2, what is on repeat in your earbuds right now? And don't lie. I have subpoena power that I can find out. So don't try to say like Mahalia Jackson's, hallelujah or something like that, when it's 2 Chainz or something ghetto that you don't want everyone to know about.
It's actually not. I've been doing a lot. I've been trying to stay zen. All right.
Okay.
So it is Anthony Hamilton. Just his voice soothes me. So I love Anthony Hamilton.
All right. A lot of Anthony Hamilton. And if you had to use 2 words to describe Marilyn and 2 words to describe Wesley that were positive, because we're going to end on some positivity, what would you use, or a small phrase to uplift them before this ends?
Marilyn, 2 words, trailblazing. But that's like a hyphenated word. Trailblazing and resilient.
Love.
Trailblazing and resilient. And Wesley, I'm admiring his haircut, but I feel like I won't be trivial and just go like fly. Also, unapologetic, and fierce.
Love it. All right, Marilyn. So what is a positive, a policy or initiative you are working on right now that you are most proud?
I'm so proud of my sentencing review unit that we started in December. It's allowing us to go in and look at some of the individuals and juvenile lifers, as well as, the elderly population that have been sentenced to life. And so we've had a number of, including one of the longest serving female prisoner was released under my new unit. So I'm excited about that. And we're doing restorative justice practices with the victims. So.
Excellent. What is on repeat in your earbuds?
Jasmine Sullivan, right now.
Yeah,
that album is hot. I like it.
And then tell me 2 words to describe Miss Kim and Wesley.
I have to say 3 because whenever I think of Kim, bold, brilliant, beautiful, inside and out. Wesley, this is my brother from another mother. I love this man. I just say he's courageous. And let me see. I need a good one because me and Wes, we go at it sometimes.
Are we talking about? We're not going to talk about Germany, guys. So just move.
Yeah.
On.
That was it. Hey.
All right, go ahead.
We're talking about race. But this is a good brother. I love and appreciate, and I'm so incredibly proud of him. So I would just say this is a good man through and through, and I'm so incredibly proud of him.
All right, Wesley, you are last, but absolutely not least. What policy or initiative are you working on right now in your office that you are most proud?
If I had to pick something, it would be our conviction incident review unit, because I think if we're going to put people in jail, we have to have safeguards to make sure we get it right. And we were able to release our first individual who was wrongfully convicted, and to know that someone who had been in jail for 20 years is now out because of the forward-leaning work that our office did. I'm very proud of that. And there's some other things, but that'd be one that I could think of.
You should be. Congratulations. What is on repeat in your earbuds?
I'm telling you, I'm being honest. I just watched the 2 killings of Sam Cooke, and so now I'm on a Sam Cooke just fix. So I got Sam Cooke live at Harlem Square. It is a magnificent album. I cannot stop playing it, and that's what's in there now. Always Tupac, but that's neither here nor there.
Rachel's mad that it's not Nelly.
I love it.
That's our guy. That's
right.
Like,
and then 2 words.
That's always
2 words to describe, or a few words to describe Marilyn and Kim, and then we're gonna end this evening.
Okay, so I got to start superficially.
You know it should be the St. Lunatic.
Let me just start.
If you
let me start there. But can you all hear me? Because it's kind of going out, and I don't know if it's me. Okay, good.
You're good.
So
you think it's Rachel.
So yeah, both of them got to start there. But incredibly, so I'm gonna start with Kim. Just first of all, I came in and Kim was already there doing the work, and the way that she brought us into our office, just protective, but then also with the things that she's had to do, just courageous and just wonderful, magnificent. And then Marilyn, my home girl, both of them are my girls, but yeah, that's like Sister Marilyn. So Marilyn is just I'm trying to think Beyonce, take no prisoners, but then as compassionate as they come. And I could describe both of them with the same way, with the same in the same vein, if you will. I'm in awe of both of these women. And Rachel, I'm gonna throw you in there too. Like, I know you're the moderator, but I'm throwing you in there too. I got so much respect for you ladies. To know that I always have someone that has my back, and vice versa. And Rachel, you just like, Rachel is just like, and I'll say this about all 3 of you, but it came to my mind with Rachel. Authentic as they come. This is what you get. There's no.
She's ill.
Right. She's not gonna pull punches. She's gonna tell you how it is. and
Love her.
and it comes from a beautiful place, and that's what all three of you. So that it's easy for me to describe you individually, because I think those characteristics apply to all of you. And did I mention just drop dead gorgeous, all three of you? Love you to death, intelligent, smart, and just the total package.
Oh, good job, brother.
Hi, Wes.
I think DA Rollins might be having some connection issues. Hold on, looks like.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, but you're freezing and
Of course.
yeah. But it looks
Right.
like you're moving.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's what I'm trying to say, if you guys can hear me, is just that I got to choose who I wanted on this panel, and it was very easy for me to select the three of you. I watch in awe of your work, and I expect excellence from you, because you have given it to me for 2 straight years. So thank you. Continue in the work, and I will be watching from Boston.
Oh, thank you. Love you.
Thank you.